welcome to an episode of HR Nightmares. This is one of our final episodes of season 2, and I am thrilled. It's our first time that we're doing a remote hosted episode here. We are here with Steve Osiel. He's our first international guest, so we're feeling like big time over here on HR Nightmares. So thanks for being here. Also on your birthday, happy birthday to you.
Thank you.
Birthday.
Here at HR Nightmares, we love to talk about all the things that HR people said that they were going to write a book about, but we will never sit down and be that focused to actually get a book written. So we just yak it up with amazing, fun guests that talk about all the things that are on our mind and our listeners' mind. So one cool thing that we do, Steve, at the end is we have audience write-ins, and they try to trick us up, or they're looking for advice, and it could be anywhere from like other HR colleagues that are out there and listen to the podcast to managers, owners, or even just employees looking for some good, solid advice because they have no one to talk to. So anyway, we're happy. We are now, as far as listenership, we love that we're listened to in every state across the United States, a couple of different countries, including Canada. I verified that. Steve's up in Toronto. So I'm joined by Steve, our guest, who is also not only lives in Canada, is our first international guest, but he is a total compensation expert. And so I think by the time you hold all these cool positions that you've held, and you've been a key trusted advisor and a consultant out there for this many years, that you can officially call yourself an expert. And of course, I've got Amy Conway here, who's a longtime OG in HR and business leadership. And so we're happy to have you. So tell us a little bit, introduce yourself, Steve, if you don't mind. How'd you end up in the seat sitting here across from us today?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. You know, one of my first jobs, I worked in a cemetery. And then
a cemetery?
Yeah,
A cemetery.
I was cutting grass, very quiet, lots of reading to do. Then I worked actually with sex offenders, testing, but that's another story. And then I ended up in HR. So it's, I keep going better and better.
This is amazing.
So naturally, I transitioned to HR.
Oh my
Exactly.
God.
But what's funny, but on the side, I'm sort of a beekeeper on the side. So I'm going from HR to bees, which sting just a little bit more realistically than what HR does or in the business. So, yeah. So thanks for having me on, Lisa and Amy. I really do appreciate it. So I'm a brother from another country, I guess you can say, up in Canada, but everybody cares about pay. Everybody cares about compensation and the benefits they receive. So really, we're very similar in terms of what's happening. Little bit of taxation differences, a little bit of difference in how benefits are certainly applied. No commentary from a Canadian perspective on U.S. benefits in terms of political
Come
opinion.
on.
You mean
That's for
healthcare?
another episode.
That's another episode. But yeah, so I actually started undergraduate in psychology, didn't want to get a PhD. It was going to take too long. Fell in love with stats. Fell in love with a girl from New York, so I actually did my master's degree at Columbia University, spent 2 years in New York City, which is an amazing time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I worked my way up. I fell in love with compensation and, fitting it all together. Started off from a junior something, an analyst to a specialist to a manager to a director. And then finally I took the leap into consulting. And so a different world. And rather than seeing over and over cycles within organizations, I've seen now 200 organizations. I've seen everything there is to see on a compensation perspective, working with leaders such as yourself, working with CFOs, and I'm really enjoying it. And through my travels with JMI, I got to meet you in Baltimore, Lisa.
That's right. Yeah, I went. That was one of my favorite trips I ever did, not only because the workshop at JMI Private Equity Group was free and Steve was there, but also the night before I was sitting on the porch of my hotel, and it looked over the power plant in Baltimore, which is like an outdoor music venue, and Mastodon was playing, which was like a heavy metal It was so funny. I was like, I'm here for this like super white collar conference, and Mastodon is jamming outside the night before. So that was a memorable 24-hour trip, Steve.
Ah, nice. And so hopefully I'm happy I was part of that.
Yeah. The great part is, a lot of the clients that Amy at Leath HR Group, and then I'm now working as the chief people officer at Vanica, and we're very small, right? We only have 140 employees at this point, but we're growing. A lot of the companies that we work with, we have these big company backgrounds, and we understand sort of like total comp and ben, total rewards from a big company standpoint, Fortune 500 standpoint. But now we work with much smaller clients, and so a lot of where we're coming from and our listenership is coming from like mid-size, or larger small companies. So just kind of teeing that up. I mean, actually, it doesn't even matter what size company it is. Basically, I've found in my 20 years being an HR person that comp is basically always a lose-lose conversation. You cannot, you give somebody a 50 and they want two 25s, or you give somebody $100 bill and, they want $200. So, I feel like it's always been that kind of way. What keeps you in this game, and like how do you help people like me and Amy steer clear of HR nightmares related to these lose-lose conversations? We're constantly trying to coach managers how to talk about comp, but I feel like it's a never-ending nightmare.
Yeah, so in my travels, as I was mentioning, I used to work for a larger organization, and at a certain point in time, I went from being a professional HR person, putting in the mantra on the words of HR, to then becoming a business person. What does the business want? How does it look at the labor cost? How do you sell a product? And it's really connecting the dots from the business to the people, and the and it's really important to do this. And I think sometimes within HR, we talk about performance management, we talk about training and development, we talk about bonus plans, but we never really connect it to the thing that the general managers, that the owners, that the shareholders, that the executive team is talking about how much do I have to pay? How do I keep these individuals? And at the end of the day, and this discrimination is a bad word nowadays, but they want to discriminate. I need you to help me run my company. I need to make a difference in how I pay you or you. So we don't want to discriminate based on the things that are based on gender or race or anything like that, but we need to discriminate based on contribution.
Yeah.
And I think HR struggles between, differentiating with people, getting to the point versus equity and fairness and structure and all of those things. And we tend to lose our momentum when we talk to leaders, when we put in too many of these big organizational words rather than what organizations between 100 and 300 want, which is really get to the point. How much is it going to cost me? How do I do this? How do I stay online and do this? And that's really where I focus my career, talking to the leaders in a no nonsense language, and they've really appreciated it. And I think that was the conversation that we had in that training session. No nonsense. And so it doesn't have to be a nightmare, but it absolutely could be a nightmare.
What's your experience with whiners? Do whiners usually end up getting the most money? Or like, do we act on whiners? So you're talking about differentiating based on contribution. I love that. But like, what about Amy and I do, like out there in the consulting world, it, like
Yeah.
the CEOs are sick of hearing from the same old squeaky wheel. It's like, just do something for them. Like, what do we have to do to shut them up? I mean, so what's your experience with whiners?
It's so interesting. And take benefits for example. You put in a plan that is right for 80 to 90% of the population because it's for everybody. But who's going to complain is the 10 to 20% to say you did something to me, and they're looking at it from an individual perspective, which they should. Every employee should be asking for as much money as possible because management has to balance that. And the first answer is no, and then we come to some sort of agreement. But we're looking at it from different lenses, the population versus the individual. And the whiner is really an advocate for themselves. I mean, that's a better way of saying the words.
Yeah.
And we all want more money. We all should be asking for it in one way or another. So, number one, they have to be listened to some degree, but they have to be contextualized. And a whiner may not, they may not stop whining, they may leave. So it's really key from my perspective to say, here's the aggregate value and the cost of labor. Here's how we differentiate and pay individuals in that total cost. Here is the level of turnover you may see from that. Here's the level of complaints you may see from that. Is that an acceptable level? So I think we need to start from the management level. What is the tolerated turnover rate? 10%, 20%, 30%? Because I can give everybody $200,000 and you have no turnover rate, maybe no productivity, but it's going to cost way too much money. So you balance between the tolerated risk of exposure versus the cost of that. And once you settle that, it's the same thing with the merit increase, to say we are going to have a 3% increase this year, even though we know inflation's higher than that. But in reality, there's going to be some leakage, whining leakage of another 1%. We build that in. We then act like we're complaining. Oh my God, I can't believe this. Okay, for you, we'll make the exception. But we've already built that in.
Okay. Okay, that's a good tip.
I mean, I
The
think that's
whiner
the reason
build
that
in.
Yeah.
I think where I see it a lot is like in our small businesses, they don't have a compensation strategy to begin with. So they're kind of just like making decisions as they feel the right thing to do at the time. And that's when I see it get really out of balance. And sometimes my best advice is like, let's get it right the first time. Let's stop making people have to come back and constantly negotiate with us. It's like we're not getting it right to begin with. We have a range and then you paid them at the lowest end of it. You know, it's like what's the strategy here? Because we're just kind of floundering. I think that is one of the biggest differences between working for a really large organization that has a bucket of money and knows exactly how they're going to spend it, and we're a smaller organization that has more flexibility to begin with. So therefore, there's things like this that they just don't have a good strategy around, so that they can actually go back, and when they have to say no, they can do it with confidence.
Yeah.
Versus now they're like, oh, they're going to leave. And I'm like, people are going to leave sometimes. There are always going to be places that's going to pay somebody more money than us. But we also have to maintain kind of where we're comfortable compensating people to keep the business running with the most amount of people as we can happy.
So tip number one in that is allow the leaders to be honest, because the facade of having to be politically correct, having to believe in equitable treatment of everybody all the time, having the social agenda be the reason you make business decisions, we're all forced to speak in a certain language, no matter how much we actually accept that language. So number one is to say, well, are you really cheap, or are you really afraid, or are you really aggressive, or do you really care about your employees? Find out, allow them to answer. And if the answer is, I just don't know what to do, and I don't know how to act, or it's like, yeah, I need to put more money to the shareholders, or we're expanding a business, so I cannot give any more money now. Allow them an honest answer, and you'll find that 99% of the time, nobody wants to hurt anybody. Nobody's acting unethical. It's just a matter of immediate priority and immediate resource allocation. And then we work behind to make that happen. So if you say, hey, I'm on your team, I've listened to you, I understand why there's limitations, we'll work with those limitations. You'll tell them what the risk is of those limitations, and then at least you can move forward. So if, in many organizations, for example, have a gender pay issue, there's no question about it. If you come too forcefully and saying, hey, slap on the wrist, my God, this is wrong, 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 they don't know what to do with it. Their backs are going to go up with it, and there's nothing actionable about it. And then they do tokenism. Well, I'll increase this, and I'll change this, and I'll do it here and there. But if you say, okay, listen, let's just go from the place you are now to +1 for next year and +2 for the following year, we're going to get to where you need to go. But allow them their defenses to go down first. Really important in compensation, because it's all about money. And There is greed in money. There is selfishness in money. There is unequal distribution in money.
Well, I think it depends too, like which leader in the room you're talking to, right? It's like, are you talking to the finance team about the stuff, or are you talking to the marketing team, right? And that's where I think we see it get really like out of balance. And I'm like, yeah, I don't, how do I win the CFO over on this one? Like,
So I had, and maybe this is totally inappropriate, I once said in my journeys to, I don't know if it's an HR person, I can't remember. I said, your job is to make this man's grandson way richer than you'll ever be. That's your job. And if you think that you work for you, you're not here under the pleasure and behest of the leader, you're wrong because you're just going to butt heads. So as long as you try to make the shareholders do well, you will do well. Don't ever forget that.
It's true. You are paying for private
we use
school.
it's all about how we influence the leaders as HR business partners, and
Right.
they all tick a little bit differently. So I want to switch subject a little bit because I'm curious, because this has come up for me pretty recently, and I fit an certain age demographic where I have my own personal beliefs on it. But when I was at Nordstrom several years ago, we went through kind of a change in some of our compensation for leadership levels and removed the equity piece from quite a bit, because really we had done extensive, 2 years worth of studies and research firms and all of this. And what we constantly heard was that different generations in the workforce would rather have more fixed pay than variable pay elements. So I've had this come up recently with an organization, and someone left that had some equity, and the leadership team was shocked. And I kind of said this, right, as the youngest person in the room, and I'm not young, I'm in my 40s by any means, but I said I would agree, right? And that equity wasn't super important to that person. They weren't happy and they chose to leave anyway. But I'm curious, and what have you found as kind of the changing trends in that fixed pay versus variable pay, and from a total rewards? Like, is base salary still number one for people?
So it's a great question. Anytime there is a threatened current stance, meaning I feel like I'm not going to be able to afford my rent or my mortgage, I feel like the car payments or my school payments is too high. If today's life is unaffordable, stop talking to me about 401k plans. Stop talking to me about my future self. I'm worried about my current self. And it could be just an insecurity, not even a reality, an insecurity. So, but the more that insecurity is there, the more it's all about give it to me now and give it to me in cash.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about my future. I don't trust the future. And that's really, and to tell you the honest truth, at this high inflation rates, that's really where we are right now with a lot of people.
Yeah.
One thing in the past that bothered me, at one company that I worked for, they issued me equity, but they would never provide me with any kind of like illustrative model. And so that's been one thing that as we, at Vanica, if we're able to give, especially like new executives, profits interest unit is the structure that we're using. We try to give them something concrete. So like, if this, then that, if this, then that, year by year by year by year, so that it feels like a little more real, because it's so nebulous and like, could it be 3 years? Could it be 8 years? Could it be never? And so it is very hard for people who don't have sort of a entrepreneurial mindset or a risk mentality to put their chips in that bucket. Bonuses and stuff is maybe we could talk about bonuses a little bit with respect to variable comp, but equity is hard for people to really, especially I would think young people that haven't paid their house off, do have car payments, do have student loans. It's hard for them to be like, okay, they got to really hit the I believe button on the company. And that's
Yeah,
a
and plan to
responsibility you have to
stay.
explain.
Well,
Yeah, I
so
think it's a retention thing, right? And so I'm like, I look at how much money I gave back when I quit that large corporation, because
right.
3 years worth of that equity had not vested. So I gave a lot of money back. So I think that's also where we have to remember, like, with the ever changing generations in the job market, they're just their desire is different. And I don't think, a boomer generation statistically staying in jobs a lot longer than our Gen Z and millennial generations are staying in jobs. And that's just facts, right? And so I think that's hard. But I would say that also the one big thing is like, I didn't know what to do with it. I wasn't a financial planner. I wasn't given money originally for financial planning services. So I'd look at how much I like did an option on and I lost it anyways because it was like stock and I was like a 29, 30 year old getting stock options and I had no idea. Because
Yeah.
yeah, and now I look back and regret that, but I didn't educate myself better. But
So
obviously,
Sorry.
companies can't, they can't do what if statements. It's like, hey, if it doubles, you're going to get this. You're just not allowed to forward project. You can provide calculators so that employees can do it themselves, but it's so distant from the current, and we don't necessarily understand it. We get what a 401k is, but we don't get what equity is. So it is suffering from lack of knowledge. But ways to work around that is if I'm going to give you a bonus worth $10,000, let's say, I can add $2,000 of equity to it. So it's attached to something and it's an additive, even though it's not really an additive. Again, I would have baked it in with the CFO, but it feels like, hey, not only are you getting 10, but I'm also giving you this extra two when it kind of means something. And then you're going to say, oh, well, what is it? And so on and so forth. So as long as your primary need is satisfied, the bonus payments, anything extra will seem extra. But it's how it's communicated is really important.
When's a good time for a smaller business? Like, let's talk about like, I don't know, 40 to 100 employees. When's a good time for them to consider doing some kind of profit sharing with their employees? Like, if they haven't historically been able to bonus people, it doesn't pay for itself. Like, how do they determine when they maybe look at like a profit sharing program or something like that? How can they get the business to pay for a bonus program?
Well, small businesses are usually strapped for cash. That's so you start to pay profit sharing when you have more ability to pay. That's a starting point. And when you start to show profits, because otherwise it'd be a bait and switch thing to say, hey, we got this program. It could pay you 20,000 or 10,000 or 2,000, but never mind, it's not.
We've never been profitable yet.
not profitable. Yeah, no profit
That's an
sharing.
issue.
And the other thing too is profit sharing denotes you're actually being transparent about your profits. And so there's sometimes smaller
Right.
organizations do not want to talk about how much money they're making and so on and so forth. So when they get comfortable with the ability to pay, the ability to show some metrics, and they're looking for longer term retention, that is when they start to do these things. Because when you're smaller, it's about the teamwork, it's about the connection and access to the leadership team. It's the ability to feel like you're accomplishing something. So the relationship that companies have with the employee is not per se about the money, but about the the work environment, and then it becomes the opportunity, right? Oh my God! So if I'm not making a lot of money now, I could make a lot of money in the future, right? So that is when you pay a little bit less with a lot of equity. Then it sort of settles into no, we just need employees, so we're not gonna. It's not about accessing the CEO. It's not about the future. It's about the work you do now. So there's a progress of styles, and that's really what you want to try to be clear about in how you communicate to the employees. And that's really the overall compensation statement. And tip number two is people get it wrong. HR people get it wrong because they come up with these standard generic statements that don't really tie into really what they're trying to achieve. And if you can just be honest again with where you are and how you want to pay people, how you want to keep people, who you want to keep, it will really clarify the pay relationship you have with employees.
I want to talk about merits and inflation. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay.
I had
So,
someone recently say to me, I don't believe in merit increases.
Oh, see,
I
I'm
was
like,
like,
all we do is merits. We don't do cost of living because if I'm paying you well, then you're getting paid in the today, the market rate for your job you're doing. So I'm like, don't talk to me about cost of living if like I'm paying you well for the job that you're doing based on a recent good benchmark. But what's your like? You have any good stories for us, Steve, about merits versus cost of living versus only adjusting people's salaries for inflation? Like, what's the best practice, and what's a good talk track for that with employees?
Well, it's not a good talk track, but here's the reality. Merit
Even better.
increase is not connected to the cost of living. It is not. It is connected to the unemployment rate.
Merit.
Period. Merit, which means I only
cost of
need to pay
labor.
more when there's hardly anybody in the market, low unemployment rate. But if there's a ton of people looking for jobs, high unemployment rate, I don't need to pay 3, 4, 5, 6%. So it's the 3% maybe fine is based on cost of living, but it's really connected to unemployment rate.
Yeah,
And
it's
we
kind
feel
of
it.
the cost of labor versus the cost of living.
Right. I mean, think about a couple of years ago in tech, mid-pandemic. Oh my God, tech folks were so expensive. But now there have been so many layoffs. You say, hey, I don't have to pay as much anymore, right? Because there's more people looking for work,
Yeah.
and that's so. Um, and merits, okay. So let's say the market is really pays for a job $50,000, okay, or 100, whatever the number is, but the average or the median is $50,000. You have to ask yourself, well, why should I pay 51 or 55? Why should I pay 60,000 if I can pay 50,000? So the way you answer to yourself is that 1,000 or $10,000 is actually a premium for retention. That's all it is. So anything above the market, whether it's in base salary, whether you have a better benefits plan, whether you have a better matching program, is a premium for retention. And if it's not creating retention, then why are you paying it
Right.
at the end of the day? Why? And that's what I would say. What is the utility and the ROI of the premium paid on salary? So a merit increase of 4%, it's either because you're going to try to beat and do better than others, or you're trying to catch up to others, and you have to pay more now. That's really what it comes down to.
So then the question is, how do you get your bang for the buck on that, right? Because if I'm going to pay you if I'm going to pay you 53, but the market says 50, how do I get some mileage out of that and let you know that you're really special? I'm paying you extra. I want you to feel great. You're coming in like higher than I need to pay for these other awesome candidates, but I want you and I want you to feel great. Like, how do I get mileage out of that?
Nobody's going to buy it at 53 versus 50. It's
Let's
such
say
a
150 versus 100. I could go get a great software engineer for $100,000, but I'm gonna pay this dude 150 because he's a he's a stunner and he just got laid off, but he's got three offers on the table. Like, how do I
at a
make him feel great about that?
yeah, at a certain point in time, there's not enough differentiation that people are going to say, I don't feel the love. Not in a very simple terms, that's what you're trying to get employees to do. I feel like you're making a difference for me. Okay. And we're going to talk about transparency, I think, a little bit later on. But think about pay or the total compensation as bragging rights. Okay. Now, I can't tell people my salary because it's private, generally speaking, but I can brag about the benefits I have, and I can brag about the trips that I get, for the sales conferences. So there's a certain thing that people want to feel good about what they're making, and then they want to be able to share it with their personal community. And so the difference between 50 and 53 is negligible, and they can't even talk about it because it's my salary. I'm not going to tell people. But if you added benefits, if you did a better match, if you did a profit sharing, if you did a random bonus, something that they can say, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Wow, this adds something different, that is going to make a difference. Because how do I, there's taxes and there's whatever the case might be. The difference between 120 and 125 has no impact on my lifestyle at all. Zero.
So you put a lot of weight in the ancillary benefits and like above and beyond salary because you feel like when I'm sitting at a bar talking to the guy next to me, I'm bragging about my company's other rewards, basically. I don't know that I've ever had anybody brag about a 401k. I feel like is 401k like people don't care about that anymore? How do we feel about that?
Yeah, you do a a a a 2-to-1 match. You put in 5%, the company will give 10%. Have you ever heard of
No.
that before?
I was like, that's
No.
not
That doesn't happen.
Okay,
if that happened, people would care about their 401k.
exactly.
I was
Really,
like,
it's the
oh
opposite.
man,
I
I
put in
would feel
10. The
great.
company maybe puts in up to 4 or 5 if I'm lucky.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did you see your reaction? So there was
I was like,
oh my God.
if someone in the bar said that, I'd be like, what company do you work for?
Where do you work?
Exactly. So there's wow stuff.
Yeah. So
There's
you got to figure out like
Yeah.
what's your wow thing.
what's your wow thing? Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think for 401k, I think it's because it's so standard now. Like, who's going to work for companies that don't have that other than maybe like startups because it's a cool experience or
Yeah.
really small entrepreneurial companies are getting off the ground, right? But like, if you're going to a company, even that I would say has more than 50 employees, they've set up some kind of simple IRA type
Yeah.
system.
Right.
So,
But it's not a wow factor.
right.
No.
It's just so
Standard.
standard that it's like, do people care about this? Is this
You
important
give
anymore?
everybody in the company a leather jacket or some sort of Archie comic jacket from the 50s that has their logo that costs $150 each. That, and people are going to look at it, it doesn't mean anything. But yeah, they're not throwing it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm saying is if everybody pays $50,000, you only have to pay $50,000. If you pay $51,000, you're really not going to get the appreciation you think you're going to get. In order to get
Right.
true appreciation, you now need to move it to probably 55 to 58 to 60,000
Yeah.
to really feel, oh my God, it's something different. I'm not going to be able to replicate that. So if it's going to be lower, if you don't have the money, you then do it in other ways that you think the employees, the broader base of it, or the influencers, if you have influencers in an organization, are going to really appreciate.
Yeah.
Because that's
Some companies, I mean, yeah, for some companies that are like kind of doing like mediocre IRA or like 401k contributions, you may be better off just like totally scrapping it as a whole and using that money to dump it into a wow factor that employees really care about. I mean, you could grandfather
Or using
everybody
a
that's on the plan, but anybody new, it's like we don't have that because people generally don't care about it. I'm gonna take the money and do something else.
Yeah. Or using a percentage of it, right? So it's like companies that do have up to 6%. It's like, is it 3 or 4? And then taking that bucket of money into other things. I mean, I think it's all about kind of total rewards, total benefits, compensation is
Right.
all one big bucket of money. It's really just how you spend it that differentiates you probably. Because
and then here's what happens. A new employee has no relationship with the organization. So the only thing that we know is money. I asked for 60, you offered me 58, we agreed on 69 or 59, right? That's all we know. But eventually, either I like the work, I like the boss, I like the team, I like the product. Eventually, you can literally underpay me and I'm not going anywhere. I'm part of the furniture. So the relationship between the organization and the employee is no longer about money, it's about something else. So therefore, don't put money where it doesn't need to be put.
yeah.
Put the money where you think it's going to have the best bang of retention. And ultimately, so, another way to look at it is organizations that say yes to employees all the time for pay, it works for an individual, it works for a couple months, it works for a year, but eventually the labor costs are so high that you then have to reduce 10% of your staff. And so it's not the individual who's terminated, but somehow or other, the population gets affected. And it may be you and it may be somebody else. So So there's always an outlet of excessive labor costs.
I always think sometimes too, it's putting a band-aid on things because chances are, I see it time and time again, we throw more money at the problem and money wasn't really the problem. It was just the easiest thing for an employee to
Yeah.
like talk about because I don't like you as my leader is a lot more uncomfortable. And so like
Right.
I recently experienced this. I'm like, all right, I think we're going to have this same conversation in 6 more months. But, at the end of the day, I gave my guidance. You're the decision maker. I'll support the decision. But I don't think that's the problem because this individual is fairly compensated for the job they're in. If I thought they were undercompensated, I would agree. But like, they're not. So what is actually the problem here?
Absolutely. And, and,
Yeah.
and, and tip number three, anybody who asks for an increase and then receives it, no question asked, is usually terminated within 6 months.
Great. Let me go back.
Yeah, because it's like, I'd rather give it to you because I know
Yeah.
you're not going to be here long term. So it's
Yeah.
like, I'm not going to argue with you. Okay.
I just never think it's a solution. And I think what you said is so true, right? On the pain thing, I think the opposite, right, of what you said is true as well. Like when we're never going to keep someone, but if they're overpaid and they're not happy, they're not staying either, right? So it's like these people that if they
Right.
feel fairly compensated, even though they may not be the highest compensated, if they're really happy and they have a great employee experience, they're probably going to stick around. But if we're
Yeah.
overpaying people that aren't happy to begin with, um, they're still not going to stay.
Right.
Eventually they might stay a little longer,
Yeah.
but eventually they will get frustrated enough that they're going to leave no matter where their compensation
Right.
is.
And to tell you the honest truth, that's not bad because most of us, all three of us here, we work for more than one employer. We've grown in our career. We've had to move around, and we are now senior enough to say, "Hey, junior people, I wish you the best in your career, and you have to come and go." So, having an adult relationship, a mature relationship with an employee during the period of time, we're going to be together for 2 years, we're going to be together for a year or 3 years. Let's make the most of it. I don't want to take advantage of you. Please don't take advantage of me. I get you're going to have to move on, and here we are. So it's really hard to have that conversation because it feels very adversarial, but it doesn't have to be. It's an
Yeah.
acknowledgement that we need to work from ages of 25 to 65 or whatever that case might be, and there's going to be a number of employers, and it's okay. It's
Yeah.
okay.
I wish more leaders would take that approach. And I wholeheartedly agree with you. I took that approach when I led teams of people. I'm like, all I ask is that you do the best job you can possibly do for the amount of time that you're
Right.
working here. And when it's time for you to move on, I'll be your biggest fan. Like that's it. And it's like, I can't expect lifelong loyalty. People
Right.
have to move on,
So
you
when
know?
somebody is saying agitated about pay, the real conversation is, what's bothering you?
Hmm.
And you feel unappreciated, unloved, unsupported? Do you need a little bit more percentages to feel that? Am I going to buy all your loyalty if I go on a limb for you now, or are you just trying to take advantage of me? You want to have that acknowledgement of what's going on, because
Hmm.
if you turn to the person and say, yes, I will support you, whether it's working remote, whether it's extra time off, whether it's extra pay, within reason, you will get the loyalty of that person for that period of time. You really will. But if you're always, as an employer, hammering down, it's just going to be, a turnover of people, and people are not going to work for you.
Hmm.
So so pay, money, is the language, a part of the language of loyalty and retention and support and effort and so on and so forth. And sometimes one does not need to be paid to have all of this. They're paid in kind with other ways. And that's really what the balance is. So when an HR person has a conversation with a leader, find out who they are. Do you care about the wellness of your staff, or you just say you care about the wellness of your staff? Do you really want to be rich and take all the proceeds yourself, or do you really care about distributing? really, do you care that women are paid less? Or do you not care? And you have to do something about it just because you have to do something about it. So ask them the real questions. And if their answers are not appropriate, then in your mind, you'll help them along. Okay.
Like the women one, I fight that a lot. I'm like, let's talk about that
Yeah.
more.
Yeah. And so, they may say, not now, not now, not now, but, you will put it in. So I recently embarrassed a company into doing something about it. And I got a whole consulting assignment because of it.
Nice work.
I know. They did the merit increase. And I said, well, can we just show in the stats length of service, like pay differences based on length of service, pay difference based on department, and let's put in gender as well, pay differences based on gender. And they were like, no, gender has nothing to do with it. I said, I know, but let's just include it. Anyway, they're so biased that they embarrass themselves by looking at the distribution. And even though it wasn't a, hey, look at this, oh my God, you guys are horrible, it was so there that they then, the leadership and the head of HR commissioned, okay, we got to do something about this. So sometimes HR can push its agenda by knowing what's right for the organization, but by not slapping the wrists of the organization about not being something. And you need to know that it's going to help the organization, because other leaders just don't know what to do or how to do it. So they need you without even knowing how to ask you how to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's true. It's just kind of giving them some data points and facts. And I think for us, especially, or for me, I find especially, I work with mostly male leaders. Right now, that was not the case when I worked for a major retailer, right? It was 70% females. And even then, we had disparity that we had to fix, and we did fix it. But I work with mostly males now, so often I get the pushback that it's like my personal agenda because I'm a female. And my response sometimes is always like, yeah, it is. And if I'm the only one fighting for this, like, I don't care. I'll continue. I mean, I do it in a more diplomatic way than that, of course. I had to give good.
But also, you pay me
To
to
our
be the
clients.
expert here and
But
push
yes,
your thinking
I
and
give
not
good
be a
service to our
yes man.
clients.
Okay.
But it is true. And I'm like, well, I think it's important though, because I am the person in the room that is tied to this problem a little bit more. And I experience it myself in the market. So I can give some perspective on it. I think honestly, most of the male leadership teams I work with appreciate that because they haven't had as many female leaders in the room. So it's just not coming up as often, right? It's not being looked at.
Let me challenge you, and please don't throw anything my way, because this is just a thought exercise. If it's acceptable to move to a lower cost jurisdiction, to move from the US to China, to move from New York City to, I don't know, Tennessee, I guess is cheaper than New York City. Why don't I try to find the least labor cost group as I can? If I can get away with paying women less than men, isn't that good for profitability? If I can get away with paying new immigrants less than non-new immigrants, from a simple cost perspective, why wouldn't I gravitate towards that? If I can get away with paying 100,000 as opposed to 110,000, why wouldn't I do it to anybody? So that is the thing you have to overcome, because on one hand, it is acceptable to go to a lower cost. On the other hand, we're saying it isn't acceptable. And so the clear answer of why that's not acceptable, and maybe the answer is just simply because it's just socially not acceptable, period. That's just the end of the story, which is a fine answer. You just need to be able to action that and action against the tendency for that to happen. And that's the key, the tendency.
I think what I see in like some of the groups that I work with, it's a little bit industry. There's a couple that are more male populated industries to begin with, and that's just kind of standard.
Right.
And what I find is also we live in a different place in the country, and a lot of the females I work with, they just don't ask for it the way the men do, right? And to me, that's where I'm like, we've got to get it right for the individual, right? Because this person has the same skill set, they have the same background, they bring the same amount of work to the table, right? But because they're not as emboldened to come out and challenge and ask for more. I don't like that. I don't think people should have to always negotiate for fair pay.
Well, so
I
that
think
gets
that
to
we
the
have to be
next,
the professionals
yeah.
in the room.
Well, so like, yeah, I've got 2-3 year out of college engineers coming to my organization. The guy asked for 95. The woman says 85 to 90 would be great. We give her 85. But let's talk about pay transparency, because there's laws, there's practices that, you know, HR professionals are pushing in the workplace. Pay transparency is super uncomfortable because you've got people who are doing the work right now, then you've got newbies coming in, you've got them asking for different levels of pay on the ranges. Everybody thinks they deserve the high end of the range, right? So what are your thoughts, what are your experiences with handling pay transparency? And like in that situation that I just posed to you, the woman who says I'll take 85 to 90, they offer her 85, the guy says I want 95, they really like him, they give him 95. Same experience, look the same, great profile, but like pay transparency should help with a situation like that theoretically, right?
It should, and if we remove gender, we just maybe talk about negotiations or performance. The problem is much of the differentiation is wrong discriminatory, and much of the differences in pay is because there's an it factor, a loyalty, a contribution that you can't quite name, but it's there, and it's not a gender thing, and it's not a color thing. It's just somebody has an it factor. I don't know what it is. I can't describe it on paper, and I want to pay them more, and I want to keep them, and so on and so forth. So I see pay transparency more of a minimum standard, entry level. Hey, this is the minimum we should pay anybody, and I think that's appropriate. But I'm less bought in about the higher end, about how high it should be, and I think we have to guard against the wrong kind of discrimination in other ways. Because my job as a compensation consultant, it's not to rig the system, but to basically promote and establish a system that will allow the organization to do what it needs to do, but then show transparency to the world in the way that the world will accept that we're doing it, but still allow us to do what we need to do internally. So the locus of control, who is making pay decisions, still want management, HR, managers, leadership still wants that decision, and we're slapping them on the wrist saying, no, you make horrible decisions, and we're going to now have the employees make those decisions, and candidates make those decisions. And so we're shifting who has the authority to make that pay decision, and it's a real challenge, I think.
What's going on with it? So obviously we should restate, just in case anyone missed this or joined late, we're in 2 different countries. So just so know, different laws, different things going on in Canada. What are you seeing pay transparency? Because obviously we know in the US, like it's in some areas of the country, it'll probably be a while before it comes to North Carolina, which is where we live. We're a little behind the times in employment.
Yeah, is anyone getting fined? Like, what if you don't do
But
it?
yeah,
Who
like what are
cares?
you?
Well, so
Pay
it
the
just
fine. This came up on a previous podcast we should mention where Lisa's like, can I just post a fake range and pay the fine? And I was like, that's not the point.
it's true. Listen, it's snowballing, which means more and more jurisdictions, like the legalization of marijuana, it's going to happen everywhere. Some
Okay.
are early adopters. Canada is certainly an early adopter on that one. BC out in the West Coast, above California, and I think Washington, that has pay transparency. And they just put in a proposition here for Ontario. So again,
Okay. So you're seeing it too pop up in many more
US
places.
and Canada, we're very similar on how we structure ourselves and how we pay
Yeah.
ourselves. And so but it's still fairly new. And I think a lot of people are going to ignore it-ish until it becomes real. And there's going to be a lot of difficult conversations. So what I'm advising my clients is be transparent on your grand statements, and then be transparent in your process to say, I promise that there's no discrimination in how we change pay, how we hire people, so the process is the same. And then be transparent in definitions of levels. If you're doing this job at this level, it means you're doing this amount of work.
Yeah.
So no money involved in those transparencies, but it's just process transparency. And then be transparent. The next is actually the band range, but I would recommend to broaden the range. I would not
Yeah.
a dollar to a million, but I would do not 80, 120, but I would rather do 50, 150, believe it or not. The standard range is the 80, 120. The published range is 50, 150 because you're allowing for those exceptions at the high end because those are true, but the standard range is going to be 80, 120. So
Yeah.
I still want to keep my control for the clients I work with. And that would be you. That would be you, Lisa. I'm telling you, your organization, you should still have the authority to make the decisions. But at the bottom end, don't discriminate against women.
Right. Have a floor. No, no, no.
So
Yeah.
we're adding that in. We're adding that in.
Yeah,
No, I think that's
and,
great.
and most do, by the way. I think
Yeah.
7 out of 10 or 8 out of 10 organizations have a significant pay difference than what I think.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think it's, pretty much publicly known what the statistics still on of pay is on women and stuff. But I mean, I will say, I mean, I don't think, I think it just got that way because we weren't looking at it in a lot of the businesses that I support. I don't see that it's intentionally discriminatory by any means.
I would
It's more
agree.
just, wow, no one brought this to us, or we just have a lot of people in like special jobs and there's really like not that amount of people in one specific job that we even really looked at it before.
Do
So
I,
that's
do
where
I
it
have
gets a
30
little
seconds
out.
for a quick story?
Oh yeah,
Go for
please.
it.
So from I finished undergraduate, 4th year. I worked in a lab working with hamsters. Okay, so actually I went from cemetery to hamsters to sex offenders.
Okay, we forgot about the
Anyway,
hamsters in the.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, you missed
Anyway,
that one.
so there were 3 of us who worked in a lab after we graduated, and it was a long time ago. So the salary was $14,000. I said, "There's no way in hell that I'm going to work after graduating undergraduate for $14,000." My professor, he found a stipend or whatever, so doubled it to 28,000. I said, "Fine, I'll take the job." It was really good for me. I found out that somebody who I graduated at the same time, a woman, she didn't get the stipend, so she was making 14,000, doing very similar work to me. And there was a third woman, a woman of color, who was doing it volunteer. Again, same work. So 0, 14, and 28. And
Yeah.
and the only answer that I can give, and that's as far as I can take it, is I would not have taken the job for volunteer or 14. I don't know what the decisions the women made. I would not have made that decision.
Right. And I think that that's just, and I do some of this work in my coaching side of what I do. It's like, you've got to know your worth and what you're willing, right? And so it's not all on the employer. I think some of it,
Right.
certainly, yes, people shouldn't have to ask. They should get fairly compensated. But you're right, if it's the difference between the 50 and the 55, well, 50 is fair. 55 is the person that asked, right?
Right.
But if they're accepting something at 40 and they're not asking, it's like, well, that was a choice you made too. So we've got
Right.
to teach you now how to
That's
actually
right.
make sure that you're getting what you're worth.
And the
Yeah.
employer is actively taking advantage or blindly taking advantage of somebody.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you know what?
There's two people in that decision, right?
And in your review, and I've seen this. So men make more than women. White women make more than women of color,
Right.
and Americans make more than new immigrants to America, because it's those who don't know how to ask or are not asking appropriately are not simply getting. Period. For
Yeah.
whatever reason.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's funny. It feels like Americans are only good at negotiating salaries. Like you look at like the world overall. You go to marketplaces. I mean, it's common practice. It's culturally acceptable to negotiate over everything, but we don't negotiate over anything here except for cars and salaries. And women kind of aren't good at negotiating either.
That's a whole different conversation. Okay.
It's another
right.
episode.
That for a different episode. Hey, we're running out of time. There's too much to cover. But we're going to make time for a couple of questions. I thought they were super relevant. We told folks that we had a comp expert coming on. So the first question, this is cool too, because you are an instructor at a university, right? Are you still doing that? Yeah. So someone wrote in and said, has anybody been invited as a guest speaker to a university? I know we do that a lot with our local university, UNCW. We volunteer.
I try to do less and less of the free stuff, but
Yeah, we're going to start sharing our rate. Was it a paid gig? How much did you ask for? The college isn't asking for my rate, but I'd like to get paid. How much should I ask for? What do you guys think?
For
I mean,
me,
only you know what your rate is, but you've got to have one and it needs to be good and competitive. And, it's hard for me to answer that in what the rate should be. But I think if you feel like you should be getting paid, then that should be in the conversation of the requests too. So, but you're probably not getting paid.
yeah. Well,
Or they would have told you.
the $200 that you might have got paid, or 300 or 100 or $50 or gift card, is much less consequential than the LinkedIn that you put in, the encouragement you feel about yourself in doing that, the new experience that you had. I always ask for guest speakers, and they always feel very positive. Just like I'm a guest speaker here, I'm not going to ask you for money to do this. It's just a good thing to do.
Yeah.
It's career development.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And like, I wasn't joking when I said I'm trying to do less of the free stuff, because I feel like I did a lot of that when I was starting off, when I left corporate America and I was starting kind of my own thing. And I did a lot of that for opportunities and so that I would have the experiences. And then I slowly do less and less of that. And I lean towards more of the opportunities that I am making money, because that's how I earn a living, is to do those things and make money attached to them. But I'm still willing to do some of those other things too, and speak at the big events that put me in front of a different audience, and honestly are just good growing moments for me too. So I think there's a balance.
Also, if it's like a guest speaking opportunity that's like in front of the board of directors or at some big event they're having, that's different and you should get paid for that, right? But if it's guest speaker in Steve's class, well, then that's to your point. I mean, that's just good for your person, especially if you're trying to build a personal brand. Like, you're going to do something different in the next couple of years, or you're going to start a business, or you want to be known as like a subject matter expert on something. Get out there and build your network, to your point.
Right.
And you're going to have to do that for free.
Yeah.
I've had guest speakers talk more about guest speaking in one class than I, as the actual instructor for that class. It's like, wow, you really are selling this.
All right. Hey, here's a good one too. Last question. I got an offer for a job that I really, and I really want it, but they came in at a salary less than I currently make. I told them in the interview process what I would like to make. Why would they offer me less? How should I approach the conversation? I'm annoyed. I'd be annoyed too. And I'd tell them, that's not what I'm coming for. Know your worth.
So most organizations, when they offer less, believe they have other things going for them. And so you need to say, well, what is it that's making up the difference? And do I want that difference? So maybe they got a great 401k plan. Maybe they are completely remote. Maybe they have a great bonus plan. I don't know. So, and now if there's nothing and they're just offering less,
Expensive benefits, no 401k.
Then you're probably not getting a merit increase next year either. So
right?
consider it.
Okay. So that's what I would ask. What else is there?
Look
What
for
else
those
is there?
differentiators.
Well, and I think you just have to not be annoyed, but no, sometimes this is part of the process and you have to go back and ask. I don't always think candidates need to tell companies what they're currently making. I think they need to tell companies what they want to make. People are changing jobs because a lot of times they want more money. It's not always because they hate where they are. They're just trying to get out. A lot of times it's because they want that next step. They want more compensation, more responsibility, more career development. You've got to put a number on it as to why would you go through a whole new company and all onboarding and learning all your stuff and all the offboarding it takes from the other company to change your benefits and all this just for the same exact amount of money. So like, stop telling people what you currently make. Tell them what you want to make.
And by the way, a lot of this pay transparency is also including you're not allowed to ask what people are making.
It makes me nuts when managers are like, "Oh, well, I asked them what they were making and they told," and it's like, "Why would you ask that? Like the job is
Yeah,
worth
yeah.
this. If you think they can do the job, pay them what the job is worth."
It's funny because it's not illegal yet here, but everywhere, right? But there are a few places, and we had a write-in about that from like I think it was Nevada, maybe,
Yeah.
like months ago on that, and yeah, it was one, and we were like, oh, that's not legal here. I mean, I don't usually ask that to begin with in an exact way. I usually say, here's our range. Does that meet what your expectation is? That's what I usually say because I think that that's my responsibility as the employer to be honest and not have to put it all on the candidate. So
Well, this was awesome.
yeah.
Steve, any closing comments? I mean, I took a lot away. I love the allowing leadership to be honest, being super transparent about like this is a mutual relationship. You're not stuck here forever. I'm happy to have you for as long as you'll stay. Lots of good tips. Any nuggets you want to leave us with?
What, are you going to have like Steven Osiel, third quartile, and my phone number underneath? Because I guess I should.
Tell us where to find you. Yes, we will
Yeah,
totally do that. But tell us where to find you.
my phone number, my email address. So yes, I am thirdquartile.com. I am SOSIEL at third quartile. I do work across the United States and Canada. I have international experience. So I am a comp person who talks human being stuff, trying to get to the point of why we're doing any of this, looking at the totality of all the things we offer to our employees, and it's worked very well. And I think it's been very engaging for me in my career, and certainly for all the clients that I've worked with. And the advice I would give really quickly is be honest with yourself and be honest with the leaders in the conversation you have. What are you trying to prove? What are you trying to achieve? And do you know why you're trying to achieve that?
I love it. Pragmatic advice from a comp guy. We appreciate it. Hey, if you like what you heard, make sure that you hit subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. Hope you are, so you can see our smiling faces. We're glad you're here. If you're listening where you listen to your podcast, also hit subscribe. You get alerts when new episodes of HR Nightmares pops up. Steve, we're so happy to have you, our first international guest. Thank you very much for spending this time on your birthday. We feel super special. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of HR Nightmares, everybody. We're out.